Hello and welcome to my kitchen at home. Now recently I've been making lots of pies and tarts and I really want to share some of those recipes with you for the next few weeks. But if you're going to make lots of good pies and tarts, you're going to need a knockout shortcrust pastry recipe. So this one I'm about to share with you is one I've been using for quite a while now and it never lets me down. I'm also going to explain how to blind bake, which is the process of pre-baking a pastry shell ready for filling. And the method that I'm using today is a rubbing method. So you can use a food processor to make this pastry, but I like to use my hands. And I've got a nice large bowl here with 225 grams of plain flour. And I'm gonna whisk in 2 tablespoons of icing sugar and a good pinch of salt. And when you've done that, just put it to one side for later. And the next thing is the butter. Now the trick to really good short crust, nice short pastry, is cold butter, cold hands, keeping it cold all the way through. So if you live in a very, very hot country, you're gonna find that making pastry is a bit of a pain in the bum and you might have better results with a food processor, but give it a go anyway. I've got a nice cold block of 150 grams of unsalted butter here and I'm gonna bash it up. So I've got a piece of grease-proof paper on the top and the bottom and I'm going to flatten it with a rolling pin just by bashing it up. Now, I used to make my pastry by chopping my butter into small cubes, but actually this method's really nice because with the rubbing method, it creates little flakes of butter rather than kind of chunks that you really have to work on, so I find it a lot better. So once you've made it nice and flat, you can grab your bowl of flour back, and I'm going to break up that flattened disc of butter into my flour. And that way, when I start rubbing, all the flour will get coated because it's softer now, but it's still cold. So this works really well. And now I'm going to start rubbing the flour and the butter together. And I'm going to do this by picking up the pieces of butter and kind of pushing them through my finger and my thumb to break them up and create little flakes. And the motion that I'm using with my thumb and my fingers is a little bit like when you deal cards. You're sort of pushing the thumb forwards and kind of smushing the butter through that. And it's important to kind of keep picking up the whole lot so that all the butter gets coated in flour. And then what you'll end up with is lots of little tiny shards of butter that are coated in flour and that will make a really nice, short, light pastry. Now what I'm trying to do here is mix the butter in but without letting it melt. So if you feel like your hands are getting a little bit too hot, you've been doing it for a bit now, it's nice and warm, or you're just a warm-handed person, just run your hands under a really cold tap for a bit, dry them off, and then come back to it. And when it reaches a kind of breadcrumb stage, it doesn't matter if there's a few little tiny nuggets of butter in there that you can see, that's okay, that'll all mix in eventually. But it should be kind of breadcrumby and a little bit sandy. And now you're ready to put the water in. And I have already got some ice cold water and I'm gonna add 3 tablespoons of that. Now I'm done with my hands here, I don't want to add any more heat, so I'm actually going to use a palette knife to kind of cut this water through the rest of the mixture. Now there is such a thing as a pastry cutter, which is a really cool tool if you haven't got a palette knife. That will help you throughout this without getting hand heat into your pastry. But also if you are using a food processor, you would use the pulse mechanism. So you wouldn't want to just process it away, you'd pulse it until the same kind of effect happens. And at the moment, it's looking pretty good. Now the way to test if it's ready is to just squeeze a little bit between your thumb and forefinger, and if it sticks together, it's ready. So now I need to gather it up, and I'm going to do that in the bowl because at the moment it's still kind of nuggety and I don't want to make too much of a mess. So I'm just going to squeeze it together in the bowl. And once your pastry is all into one ball, get rid of your bowl and just lightly dust your worktop with flour. And I'm going to knead this very, very briefly, just using my fingertips. After a few seconds, it should have become a little bit smoother and then it's ready to rest. And it's really important to rest your pastry for at least 2 hours, ideally overnight, because that will help relax the gluten, which means when it comes to rolling it out, it's nice and elastic and moldable. And it's important to get it into a good position before you start rolling it. So if you're making a large pastry case, like a regular sized tart, you can flatten your pastry ball into a round circle. But I'm actually going to be making 6 mini tart cases, so I'm going to roll mine into a sausage. To rest it, you want to wrap it, and I prefer to use greaseproof paper because I think it gets a bit sweaty in cling film. So I've got a sheet here, I'm just going to wrap that up and pop it in the fridge. Now it's time to line my tins with my pastry. I've already really lightly greased them with butter, so they're ready to go. I've got my sausage of pastry here. It's nice and cold, it's been chilling overnight. And I'm going to start by chopping a piece off the end. I'm going to lightly dust my worktop with flour again. And I'm going to dust my rolling pin as well to stop it from sticking. And I'm going to start rolling this disc out so that it's about 2 or 3 millimeters thick. Now my tart tins are 10 centimetres in diameter, so I'm rolling my disc out to be about 15 centimetres so that it comes up nice and high up the sides. And now I'm going to drop it into the middle of my tin. So you want to be nice and gentle with this bit because you don't want to tear the pastry. I'm going to ease it into the bottom of the tin so that it reaches the corners. And you'll notice that it frills a little bit and it kind of bends over. Don't worry about that, this is quite malleable stuff and you can kind of get rid of those creases. So gently push the pastry in and start to smooth out those folds. Now to make sure it's in the corners, I'm just going to use the tip of my finger, the kind of side of it, just to push into the corners and make sure the pastry's right in there. Now at this point you can leave the excess hanging over the sides if you want. That is one way of doing it, and then you can bake them off like this and trim the edges. But what I'm going to do is to trim it now using my thumb. So I'm just going to push the excess bit into the side. I'm pushing it rather than kind of pulling it and stretching it because I want to have a little bit of excess so that I can make the wall a little bit higher, and if there is any shrinkage, which we hope there won't be too much, then that will account for that. And when you've gone all the way around, pop your tart tin back down and give the edges a little squeeze, pulling up a tiny bit to make the walls a bit higher. And once you've done that, you then need to prick the bottom of it with a fork, and that's going to prevent air bubbles forming when you bake it. Now obviously if you're doing one big tart, you need to prick that a few more times, but I'm just going to carry on until all my tins are lined. Now I'm going to keep my scraps just in case there's any holes that occur when I bake these. But now it's time to fill them with baking beans, or I actually like to use rice. Baking beans can be quite expensive and rice is very cheap. So I have my pastry lined tins here, and now I need to create a barrier between them and the baking beans or the rice. So I'm going to use cling film for that. You can use foil, you can use baking parchment. I like to use cling film because it's nice and soft and doesn't create any kind of divots or creases where the hard foil or paper's kind of dug into it. It's really important to use cling film and not any other kind of food wrap or anything like that, because cling film is nice and oven safe. So I'm going to cut pieces that will generously cover my pastry cases. And I'm going to drape that lightly over my cases and then pour some rice in straight over the top. And when it's full of rice, just press the rice down a little bit so that it works its way into the corners of your pastry, and then wrap the cling film over the top of that. So the reason we're doing this is because if I was to just put these cases into the oven now without any kind of weight on them, the chances are they'd rise up a little bit. This way it's kind of weighed down, so you end up with a nice, even, thin pastry crust. Now I'm going to put these into the fridge for 20 minutes or half an hour just to chill them out a little bit. That's going to help prevent shrinkage when they go in the oven. And when they've had their 30 minutes in the fridge, put them in the oven at 180 for 20 minutes. Okay, my pastry cases have been baking for 20 minutes and they're looking very nice, but now they just need an extra blast without the rice in. So I'm just going to gently take out those little parcels. And before I put them back in the oven, I'm going to brush the bases with a bit of beaten egg, and that's going to help create a little film to stop the bases from going soggy. And then these just need to go back into the oven for another 10 minutes. As you can see, my pastry shells have come out looking really nice. There's been minimal shrinkage. That's because of all the chilling and the cold butter that we used. And they're looking lovely and golden. And there's a few things you can use these shells for. I, for example, have used creme patissiere and some fruit, and I've got a recipe for creme pat on my channel, so go and check that out. You could make a chocolate ganache and put a layer of salted caramel. Really, really versatile, and I will have a couple of recipes up my sleeve for you soon. So tune in next week where I'll be sharing one of them for you. And in the meantime, please share this recipe with people you know, some friends who like tarts, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. So I'll see you next week for a delicious pie. Bye!